So lately on my Instagram, I've been posting a lot of desk setup photos and office setup photos, and I've been getting a lot of questions on how I take these. So I figured I'd make a quick YouTube video on the process of taking these from setting up the camera to editing the photo. In today's video, we're gonna cover two different photos that I like to take. The first one will be an overhead shot like this, and then the other one will just be a nice, clean, symmetrical, straight-on photo. Now, obviously, there's no formula or right or wrong way to take these photos, but I'm just gonna show you my process and what I like to do. So use these techniques and make something that's your own, that's original to you, and just have fun with it. So before we get started, let's get into the gear that we're gonna use. For camera, I'm gonna be using the 5D Mark IV with a 16 to 35mm lens. This is what I take pretty much all of my desk setup photos with, just because I like the 16 wide angle look. Usually I'll punch into even a 20 or 24 depending on where my camera's set up, but it's just nice to have that wiggle room, especially if you're working in a smaller space. You really want that wide focal length to work with. Now, if you don't have a DSLR, you're only working with your iPhone, make that work. There's plenty of mounts that you can buy on Amazon so that you can mount your iPhone the same exact way that you mount this. They also have wide angle lenses, so if you need that 16mm look, Moment makes a bunch of nice lenses. I'll link that below, and you can get that same look in your iPhone. So don't feel discouraged if you don't have a proper camera setup, and don't think that you can't take these photos just because you don't have that. Next, what you'll want for these photos is a monitor. Now, I'm going to actually use my computer monitor for this, and I'll explain how I do this. So you don't need to purchase an extra monitor for your camera, although it does help. I actually, for these overhead shots, prefer just to use that monitor, and I'll show you why. But in order to connect your camera to that monitor, you need an HDMI cord. So for my 5D Mark IV, it's HDMI to mini HDMI or micro, I'm not sure. I got this on Amazon super cheap. That way I can plug in to the monitor, put this in my camera, and then I have a live feed, and I can use that to frame up the photo. Another thing I like to have is a shutter remote. This is just for when your camera is set up in a place that you can't easily access, especially if you're the subject in your own photo, which I am a lot of the time. It's nice to have this plugged in further away, kind of out of sight, where you can hit the shutter and it's gonna start the self-timer without you having to get up, press it on the camera, run back to your spot, and start, setting up yourself for the photos. To mount your camera for an overhead shot, you're gonna want a boom stand, whether it's a lighting boom stand or a proper photo boom stand. But this is just a cheap lighting boom stand that I got from Amazon, and then I placed a cheap ball mount on top of that. This is just from a cheap tripod that I had laying around. And this is how you're gonna get the camera hanging over the desk without any legs in the way or anything obstructing your frame. So I'll link all of these below. This is definitely kind of the key component to taking a nice overhead shot. All right, so I'm gonna start by placing the boom stand on this side of the desk. We're gonna run it right over here. Camera's gonna be here. I'll be sitting here in the photo. All right, so since we're gonna be mounting a camera overhead, we wanna make sure that the boom is not in between these two legs. We're gonna wanna rotate it so that this leg is supporting the weight of the camera. We're also gonna throw a counterweight on the back here to make sure that we have enough stability for the camera to hang, especially if you're using a heavier camera like a 1DX or something bigger than a 5D. You want to make sure that this thing is balanced properly so it doesn't fall over. Right, so like I said before, make sure that you have a counterweight on a boom stand, especially if you're throwing up a heavy camera, because you want to make sure that it's balanced. So when you put the camera on without this, it's going to want to lean forward, and you might risk it falling over, cracking your monitor or something. I don't have a sandbag or any proper weight system, so I'm just going to use a backpack that I have filled with some stuff, a little clip. Once I get the camera mounted and secured to the stand, it's time to start framing up the shot. So I plug in my HDMI cord from the camera down to the monitor, and now I can use this as my external monitor for framing up everything. Using the grid lines in your camera is really gonna help you make sure that you get everything as symmetrical as possible. I like to start with framing up the desk and make sure that that desk lines up perfectly with those lines, and then I bring in the monitor and everything else kind of falls into place after that. All right, so I got the camera set up, everything's framed up properly, and for lighting, I'm just gonna use the lighting from the window. For the most part, in all of my shots, I just use natural lighting. Sometimes I'll throw up Sometimes I'll throw up that LED panel just to kind of kick an extra light. It's daylight balance, so it looks like the same source of light coming out of the window, which is nice. I'm ready to take a couple shots, and then, I mean, really just take a couple shots until you're happy with it. I usually leave the camera set up, pull the card, throw it into the computer, and kind of make sure that everything is how I like it, and that's all it takes, and then I'm usually good to go. Feel pretty good about these shots. Now it's time to move on to the next setup. Alright, so I showed you how to take the overhead shot. We got all of that done. Now we're gonna move on, and I'm gonna show you how to take this shot. It's pretty self-explanatory. I don't think I even need to make this for you to be able to figure out how I did it, but it's pretty much just on a tripod. Everything's flat, and we're just gonna be focusing on symmetrical lines, making sure everything's level, looking nice, centered, and that's pretty much all that goes into it. So I'm gonna move the desk where this futon is, under the photos, and then we'll get everything framed up and get going. Alright, so we got the desk moved. We have it perfectly centered in between those photos, and that's really easy to do. Just use the center of your monitor and place it right in between whatever the center portion of your photo is going to be. But what I want to do is make sure that this corner right here, this line, is just as symmetrical as everything else in the photos. And for this shot, I'm going to do it landscape, so we're not going to do a vertical one on this one. So for this, I'm gonna throw this LED panel straight onto the side of here and kind of just kick more of this light that's already coming in. So here's where we're at now. I'm liking that a lot. I like that we have the practical lamp on over here, then we have the nice light kicking on the side. It just gives it a nice moody look. All right, so this looks good, but I wanna change up the lamp a little bit because it's a little too bright compared to all the other areas. So what I do is I have this hooked up to a Wi-Fi bulb. I'm just gonna go in there and adjust the power of it so you can see I can turn it on and off. Just gonna turn it down a little bit. I'm also gonna adjust the color temperature. So I'm gonna make it a little cooler and see how that looks. That looks good right about there. Alright, photos are done. We've taken the overhead shot and we've taken the straight on shot. Now I'm gonna take the card, throw it into the computer, and I'll show you how I edit these photos. Alright, so we're gonna start with this photo that we took and immediately go down to profile corrections. It's just gonna take any warp out of the photo that might be there, which is gonna help us with our lines and make sure everything is symmetrical. I'm pretty much just lining up the desk. The edge of the desk, it's the easiest way for me to reference where we're at. I'm gonna do that. Yeah, make sure that's good. And our monitor's a little thrown off, but it's not too bad. I'm just gonna split the difference here. There we go. So everything just looks nice and straight. Throw it into 4:5 crop for Instagram. Let's go about here. Looks good. All right. Now, I like to go down to my HSL control and we're gonna pull out the blue. So I'm gonna pull out the blue pretty much all the way, and immediately you can see the difference in the desk and everything around it. It just looks nice and kind of monochrome, like a matte look, which I really like. Leave that there. Go. We don't want to pull out too much color because we still want there to be color. We don't want it to look like it's black and white. I got that there. That looks fine. All right. Now we're gonna go to clarity, and I actually like to go negative on clarity, and the reason being is it just kind of softens the image and gives it a different look than what you usually see. I learned this from a friend. A lot of people would crunch the image and get like that really high like contrast crunch look, but I throw it to like negative, let's go -10, -11, and it just kind of flattens out and cleans up the image overall, and it gives it a really nice look that I prefer over having a crushed clarity look, which I think is very overdone. I'm gonna bring our shadows up a little bit, our highlights down. Then we're gonna crush our blacks. So we're gonna get some of the contrast, pull our vibrance down, and then in our tone curves, I like to go 3 points, and then a 4th point down in the contrast, and really grab those blacks and pull them down as I before. Here's her after. Nothing too crazy, like I said. It's not a huge difference, but I like to shoot as best I can with these shots. I like to shoot everything in camera with the lighting and all of that, so you don't have to do too many tweaks when you're editing the photo. And honestly, that's all for coloring that I'm gonna do. Maybe throw a little more contrast in there and bring our shadows up a little more. And we do have a lot of cat hair around here because my cat jumped up while I was shooting this. I'm gonna try and fix that, but if not, it's not a big deal. All right, so next up, what I like to do is I like to grab our gradient tool, and I'm gonna create a new mask here. Hold down Shift to straighten it. And in the bottom of the frame here, I'm just going to bring up the shadows for like a fade, kind of gets rid of the contrast. Bring our exposure down, and what this is gonna do is darken up that bottom portion of the frame, and it just kind of brings your eyes up to the main subject of the photo. This is a trick I learned from a buddy who shoots wildlife, and this actually translates really well with minimal office type photos, I've learned. So I started doing this with all my shots. It just kind of gives it a nice little style to it. It doesn't do too much. Again, you don't want to overdo it with the editing in these shots, but it just kind of helps bring your eyes back up to the desk instead of seeing everything down here. And it's kind of a nice little transition from the top of the photo to the bottom. And I think that's good for this one. So here's the finished shot. Again, simple, clean, don't do too much in the editing. The framing of everything is just nice, simple. That's what I like to do with these shots. All right, so we did our vertical overhead shot. Now I'm gonna move to our second shot, which is just gonna be a landscape, straight on shot of the desk in front of the wall with all the photos. So this one, again, very straightforward, just nice and clean. Everything's level and symmetrical. Enable profile corrections. And we're just gonna use our grid and make sure that everything lines up right. Cool, that looks great. So this one, you'll notice that like in the gray walls up here, there's a lot more blue. So we're gonna pull that blue back again. You'll see that change. Immediately we have like a nice clean look. So pull the blues out. If you were to push the blues, then you'd see a bunch of blue tones in there. So I'm just gonna strip those out. So we have that. Same process, we're just going to bring our shadows up a little bit. Plus 50, drop our blacks down. I'm also kind of seeing a little green tint. I don't know if it's just my monitor, but that could be from the LED light. Yeah, so we're just gonna pull those out. Pull out the yellow a little bit. All right. And then let's drop our clarity back. Same thing we did in the last photo. I'm actually gonna crop this in a little bit because we don't need all of this frame. All right, let's make our 3-point tone curve adjustment down here. Just tiny adjustments. See how this looks if I bring this to 55, because again, our LED was, nope, that looks terrible. Never mind. All right, this looks pretty good. I'm gonna go down to calibration, and I'm gonna bump the blue primaries a little bit, and what you'll notice is it brings out a lot of the color in the prints up there, the photos. It doesn't really affect our desk that much, which is nice, but it just brings out the colors up there. And I'm gonna go back up here to our HSL, a lot more of the blue, more of the aqua there. Is that before? Is there after? Looks really good. Throw a gradient here. I'm actually gonna just kind of slice the side of this frame. Give it a nice little punch, as if the light's falling off, kind of creating a light source in a sense. There we go. It doesn't do too much, but it kind of gives it a nice little look to it. There we go. So that's pretty much it. Not a lot goes into these photos, maybe a little more so for the overhead shots with the rigging, but they're really easy photos to take, and I enjoy taking these. And it seems like a lot of people on Instagram, there's a big community of people who enjoy these style of photos. So go out, have fun with it, and maybe this will inspire you to kind of build up and beef up your office setup or your desk setup so that you can take photos like this. I know from seeing photos like this on Pinterest and Instagram, it really inspired me to level up my workspace, which has helped with creativity and just other aspects of my life. So I hope this video helped you at all. If it did, be sure to subscribe to the channel, give it a big thumbs up, and also if you don't already, follow me on Instagram at Jordan Pomano. I'll leave all the links to the products that I talked about earlier in the description. Other than that, I will see you all in the next video. Peace out.